Welcome to the Straight from the Crest podcast.
Welcome back to the Straight from the Crest podcast. I'm your host, Michael David Kresovich. Big week this week as the Ohio State Buckeyes come to Beaver Stadium as Penn State tries to keep its college football playoff hopes alive. Big show today. Special guest, good friend Colin Spencer joining the program. Buckeye fanatic, very knowledgeable college football fan. Garrett's on the show as well. We're going to touch about Penn State's win over Minnesota this past weekend, transition into a preview, talk about Penn State, Ohio State, what to watch out for. Do the Nittany Lions have a chance? What we think, what we're going to be looking out. But first of all, as always, this podcast is brought to you by Protocol Beverage. As you see the flag behind me, Protocol Beverage is pioneering spike protein beverage, born from just a few dudes in Erie, Pennsylvania who wondered, why doesn't spike protein exist? They've changed that. Invention isn't for the faint of heart. Pineapple Pump, Swillberry, and Orange County are the first flavors available. They are 16-ounce cans, 8% ABV, 11 grams protein. They are uncarbonated, easy to consume. They're great. Go get them. They're everywhere. Obviously, they're in Erie. They're in Pittsburgh. They're in State College. Shout out to Chris Herb. He won the drawing last week for the merch. So, Chris, wherever you are, we'll find you and get you there. But, fellas, welcome into the show. How you doing today?
Hey, Mike. I'm good. Good to see Colin.
How's it going,
here.
Mikey? I'm good. Garrett, good to see you as well.
Welcome aboard this train transition.
Yeah, excited to be here. First time on.
Yeah. We'll just briefly
long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah.
He's been in the waiting room trying to get in.
Yeah, exactly.
So, of course, we see Penn State get absolutely steamrolled, dominated in the trenches in Ann Arbor 2 weeks ago. They bounced back with a 45-17 really convincing win over a not bad Minnesota team, but not great. But just the way they did it, I thought that was a massive step for them. Just being at the game, expecting not necessarily a collapse after a loss, but and it started that way down at the end of the first quarter, of course, and rattling off 38 points between the second and third quarter to really pull away and keep their season alive. I guess I'll start with you, Garrett. What'd you see from the biggest difference from the Michigan game to the Minnesota game from this Penn State team?
Yeah, a few things. I thought that the linebacker play was much better. Abdul Carter started, and just having Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter playing at the same time seems to be a pretty good recipe for linebacker success defensively. And Coach Franklin talked about it, a lot. There seemed to be a lot more gap discipline. If Minnesota, the wheels are kind of coming off that program, this year. At this point in the season. But if they're good at one thing, it's running the ball. They have a good offensive line. Michigan obviously across the board is better at running the ball, but it's not like Minnesota's anything to scoff at. And it was just a complete 180 of a performance, which kind of goes to show it wasn't as much personnel. The coaching staff just did not have the team prepared to play against Michigan, which I don't know how that's possible, but that is what happened. Offensively, aside from the first quarter, which was, there was a lot of boos raining down. I was thinking if there was going to be one or two more possessions of Cliff either going 0 for 3 or throwing a pick, they might have brought in Drew, but they righted the ship. The biggest thing to me was getting the tight ends involved, which is just a no-brainer. I do not know why that was not the case against Michigan or part of the game plan. Just, mesmerizing to me that we did not involve them. And then throwing the ball down the field, taking shots. You got to do it. And you know what? I did not hate the pick that Sean threw in the first quarter. You got to take a shot down the field at some time. And, I think he was something like 4 for 7 or 3 for 7 on balls thrown more than 30 yards. That's a great recipe for success. You have a few athletes out there, you got to take some shots. And so they're going to have to take some shots this weekend against Ohio State. But yes, Coach Franklin's record coming off a loss has been abysmal, just absolutely terrible. This was a good, a good reversal of that. And real quick, we want to say, the environment for the game was fantastic. I thought that the crowd kept the team in it because it was a slow start. Minnesota had several false start penalties. And so, I went on a little rant on Twitter this week about how it's absolutely ridiculous that Fox has this game on at noon. It's a complete blown opportunity to just get maybe some of the most ratings they've ever gotten in a primetime slot. But that environment has a big effect on on games, especially if you're playing a team that is not really prepared to come in there. So I think the crowd did a good job. I think the team overall bounced back nicely. And then, you got to give it all this week. The season's on the line, and they gave themselves an opportunity to be in that position with a good performance last Saturday against Minnesota.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just touching on a few things that you said. Theo Johnson, excellent game there, led the Nittany Lions in receptions, yards by far. They incorporated the tight ends. Sean Clifford with a bounce back performance. The debate all week was go play Alar. He responded, which is great. Now go play this way against a legitimate defense, the number 2 ranked defense in the country. I don't know if you listened to the Franklin's press conference, but when he mentioned that, he goes, Sean Clifford, Big Ten Player of the Week, long pause. It's like, okay, he did it against Minnesota. That's fine. Do it against Ohio State. Colin, you've watched this team obviously pretty close, and you have for years. Just touching, let's move into the Ohio State here. Just touching on Ohio State's defense, what really jumps out?
What jumps out to me is they're a completely different defense than they have been in. Yeah, I know. I'm in Columbus right now, if no one can see this. But no, it's a completely different defense than they've ran in the past. You saw right now you'll see a lot of moving around. You'll have defensive ends over in linebacker positions. Jack Sawyer will move all over the defense. One of the things that Jim Knowles talks about a lot in his press conference is a very safety-driven defense. So you'll see 3 safeties on the field a lot, and they really have 4 safeties that are going to play a ton. Proctor, Ransom, McAllister, and then Ronnie Hickman. So they're I would say the strength of their defense is probably their safety play right now. But no, I think they've definitely improved. They're much more gap sound. They're not missing tackles. And they're playing tough physical football, which I think last year was a bit of an issue for them. They were Michigan kind of I compared the Michigan-Penn State game 2 weeks ago to the Michigan-Ohio State game last year. There was just a lack of toughness, a lack of physicality. And you saw Michigan really kind of bully them a little bit. And I don't think you're going to see that with the team this year. I think they're a lot tougher of a team.
Would you say this is the best? Granted, the weapons Penn State have, they are limited, but a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball with Brenton Strange, Nick Singleton, a few guys who can make plays. Would you say this is the best offense that the Buckeyes have faced to this date?
Oh, without question. I mean, Penn State, I think that there's either 2 things that happen with Penn State. Either I think Penn State could be better than we think they are, and that Michigan game was kind of just an anomaly. They just didn't show up. They didn't wake up. That could be the case. Or maybe they're just not that great. However, they're definitely talented, and they're the most talented team Ohio State's played. I mean, Ohio State hasn't played running backs as good as Nick Singleton. Clifford's been there. Clifford's a, 4-year starter now, so he's at least been there for a while. And the receivers transferred in. I don't think there's no KJ Hamler there. There's no Jahan Dotson. There's no one like that. But compared to, Rutgers receivers weren't giving Ohio State's very many problems. So I don't think anyone Ohio State's played has been able to test the defense necessarily. So I think this week will be a pretty good measuring stick for not just on Saturday, but their success for the rest of the season as they hope to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I'll go over to Garrett here. Garrett, of course, the 2016 game that everyone raves about, the 24-21 win in Happy Valley there. Ever since then, it's been 5 straight losses, and they I don't want to say it's a hot take, but a lot of people always say like Penn State matches up well to Ohio State every year, no matter what. Looking back on the losses, 1 point, 1 point, 11, 13, and last year it was 9, but it felt a lot closer. Heading into this game Saturday, coming off a big win against Minnesota, how much did that big win? How is that momentum going to transfer over to Saturday? Or at least going to keep this competitive? You think?
Yeah, I'm a part of that. That bandwagon, I guess, that says that Penn State matches up overall better with Ohio State than they do Michigan, especially just stylistically. With that said, Colin made a good point. This Ohio State team is more physical than we have seen in some years. But, dating back to all the way back to the Urban Meyer days, when Penn State teams were clearly outmatched in 2014, right? The year the Ohio State won the national championship, and Penn State lost in double overtime, and almost covered as a 20-point dog. James Franklin's 7-1 against the spread against Ohio State. So yeah, it's a better matchup, I would say. it being played at home is going to help. And I think that there's going to be, I think Penn State's going to throw the kitchen sink at Ohio State. They know this is the season right here. It's all or nothing. And so I do think that it is a better matchup for Penn State, but, they're going against, the number 2 overall offense in the country, the number 3 overall defense in the country. Jim Knowles is a great defensive coordinator. This is a little different than what Penn State has faced with Ohio State prior. But I mentioned this to Colin before we got on air, there are some things on the seams or on the edges that, appear to me Penn State does have a little bit of an advantage of, and one of them is special teams. And so, we talked about it a little bit before, but, Colin, can Penn State do enough? Can they do enough to muddy the game? Because that's what tends to happen. I mean, Ohio State's a well-oiled machine offensively, especially. I mean, they are very impressive. Can Penn State do enough in the special teams department, or turning them over a couple times here or there, or, whether it's running a trick play or doing some weird stuff that Ohio State hasn't seen on film yet? Is there enough to do in the toolbox there to make this a game coming into the fourth quarter?
Well, I think Penn State over the last, like you talked about, since Ohio State won the national title, Penn State has found ways to always muddy the game up against Ohio State. There's been years where you think Ohio State should have won by 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns, and then it's a 1 possession game, or 1.9 point game, whatever. I think that would be, I don't know if the special teams is going to be enough. I think that whenever a team like an Alabama, Georgia, or an Ohio State, when these teams tend to lose, it's always a muddy game, right? There's always, Alabama turns the ball over a couple times. Against Tennessee, Alabama had 150 yards in penalties. There's just things that happen that when those upper echelon teams lose, the game has to be muddy. Penn State has to muddy the game up. So are they going to be able to force some fumbles here and there? Like in 2019, Ohio State's up 21-0 in the second quarter. Penn State forces a couple fumbles, one when Justin Fields is going to the end zone to make it 28-0. Then you look up and all of a sudden it's a 24-17 game. So, right. They've shown they can do it in the past. I think it all comes down to how good Ohio State's defense is. If Ohio State's defense is half as good right now, they're the second-ranked defense in the country. If they're really a top 10, top 5 defense, which maybe we don't know for sure yet because they haven't played the best teams, if they're really that good, then I think it's going to be pretty tough for Penn State. Because I think Minnesota struggled to run the ball on Penn State, even though it's a different run scheme than Michigan and Ohio State have. Ohio State's more of a power spread, where Ohio State's going to be able to get downhill and run the football a lot better than Michigan can. And Penn State wasn't willing to bring the extra guy in the box against Michigan. So Ohio State's going to force them to make that decision of, are they going to bring the extra guy in the box? Are they going to sell out to stop the run? And if they don't make that decision, if they're so worried about the receivers, I think Ohio State's going to be able to run the ball all day on them. So he's going to have to – Diaz is going to have to pick and choose his battles, and clearly he chose wrong against Michigan. So, we'll have to see. But I think like you're saying, to muddy the game up, I think he's going to have to be aggressive, and he is aggressive, and they're going to have to try and force turnovers.
And then I'm putting my Mikey Kresovich hat on right now. I'm not trying to do your job. One more question that I have. Does it concern you, Colin, the 3, I'd say, competent defenses Ohio State has played, which has been Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Rutgers, and Iowa? Obviously, Iowa, it was 54-10, but Iowa has the worst offense that's ever been created on God's green earth. So we watched that game, and Ohio State clearly struggled offensively. They clearly struggled offensively against Notre Dame. And then against Rutgers, Stroud only had 154 yards passing. Now, yes, Williams had almost 200 yards rushing. But does it concern you? Does it concern you that they're going against a defense that clearly, yes, is not a top 3 or 4 defense, but they have the talent to be a top 12, 15 defense? Are you concerned that they may come out of the gate slow and have a difficult time finding a rhythm?
Well, I think they came out of the gate slow against Notre Dame, but look, there's caveats to everything. It doesn't help that on the second play. Well, yeah, but on the second play of the game against Notre Dame, Jackson Smith and Jigba goes down. Now 6-7 weeks into the season, we look at, Ohio State doesn't have Jackson Smith and Jigba, and it's like, well, does it? It matters, obviously, but Marvin Harrison Jr. is established now. There's talk of him he's already going to be the number 1 receiver in next year's class. Egbuka's already there. So the Notre Dame game, I think, was just a case of, first half, first game of the year, you lose arguably your best player on offense. It takes some adjusting there. But you saw in the second half there, they pounded it down Notre Dame's throat. And to be honest, against Iowa, too, that was a terrible first half they played. Stroud made multiple bad decisions. But after the first interception to start the second half, you started to see Ohio State assert themselves more. And to be fair, look, that's the talent gap, right? Like, Iowa's going to be able to slow them down for a little bit, but eventually Ohio State's going to get it going. I would say I'm not really concerned with the slow starts. Ohio State's looked dominant pretty much in every facet. But look, if Penn State makes the day hard on Stroud, then Penn State will have a chance. But if you let Stroud sit in the pocket, you don't get pressure on him, and you let him find Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming, who's a Pennsylvania native, along with Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, you let him find those guys, and he's going to pick them apart. And it's going to be a long day for Penn State. It doesn't matter who the secondary is. And Penn State has a good secondary. But if you give Stroud time to throw with how accurate he is and how talented the recievers are, he's going to get his. So I wouldn't say super concerned. I think Ohio State will have a good game plan. And, I mean, look, I don't think it's I think Ohio State will be fired up to come into Beaver Stadium and play Penn State. I think Penn State's going to get Ohio State's best game of the year. And I think it was probably pretty hard for those guys to get up for a noon game against Iowa with Penn State the next week. So I'm not overly concerned, but I'll be better equipped to answer that question after the first half on Saturday. How concerned I am with the offense. That's a good. I'm not concerned until I see the second half of the game Saturday. Then I'll tell you.
Okay. There you go.
Obviously, from a talent perspective, Ohio State wipes Penn State out of the water. I mean, it's not even close. Colin named the lethal weapons they have at wide receiver, just all across the board at quarterback position. Of course, C.J. Stroud's an absolute monster. He's thrown for nearly 1,000 yards more already than Clifford. But to your point, let's go back to the special teams, because I feel like to win this game, Penn State's going to have to be very aggressive on offense, create plays on special teams, and somehow take the ball away from one of the nation's top offenses. And that's what they were able to do in the 2016 game. That's what it came down to. But I just feel like there's such a lack of talent from that 2016 Penn State team to this team. And but before we jump back in to that, Colin, the 2016 Ohio State team, this year's team's much better than that, correct? From a talent perspective, would you say offensively?
Oh, offensively, there's not much of a comparison. I mean, that team had JT Barrett. You had Noah Brown, who you're familiar with, Mikey, being a Cowboys fan. He's ended up sticking around the NFL for a while, but he wasn't nearly as dominant as the guys they have now. And then they had Curtis Samuel was probably their best offensive player that year. But, I mean, compared to the guys they have now, you have the running backs those years weren't near as good as Trayvon Henderson or Mayan Williams. I mean, I will say the defense that year was, in my opinion, one of the most talented defenses maybe in college football. You had Malik Hooker, Garrett Conley, Marshawn Lattimore, Nick Bosa. I mean, you had guys in a lot of first-round picks on the defense. But for the offense, this team is as talented of an offensive team as Ohio State's ever had.
Yeah. No,
when you factor in the fact that they probably have three, if you include Smith and Jigba, which there's rumors that he may be done for the year, but if you do include him, that's three first-round picks at receiver. Trayvon Henderson, Mayan Williams are studs, and you probably have the number one pick at quarterback. So it's without question the most talented offense I've seen in Ohio State.
And I think we'll see that right away. But my biggest fear of being a Penn State fan is Penn State doesn't have the dudes to keep up with Ohio State. I think like Garrett mentioned earlier, they're going to have to do stuff. I kind of compare it to the Michigan game last year when Michigan came in. Penn State was very aggressive on special teams, faking a field goal and a punt in the opening drive. They're going to have to do that. They're going to have to be very, very aggressive on fourth down and somehow slow this big attack down. I mean, if you look at Mbuka's his stats compared to Penn State's receiver, he has 795 yards compared to Parker Washington has 300. Like, blows it out of the water from a numbers standpoint. But I think the biggest issue Penn State has as far as slowing Ohio State down, to be honest with you, is the fact that, and I talked to Garrett about this during the Minnesota game last week, every single game Penn State plays, even when they play well, they're going to have 2 or 3 possessions where they go 3 and out on offense. And when you're getting pinned back and Penn State's going to punt, they're going to have to punt. Ohio State's going to get good field position. When you talk about, you have to we talk about the special teams play, and to your credit, 2016, clearly special teams made a big difference on it. 2017 was when Denzel Ward came off the edge,
blocked the punt at Ohio State, started that snowball effect for Penn State. So, I mean, to your point, that is an issue. But the offense, I mean, if you're sending your punter out there to punt from his own 30 all the time, it's going to be your special teams isn't going to have a very good look when Ohio State's getting the ball on the 50 going into score. I mean, it's tough from that regard.
Yeah, I think that, to me, the most interesting matchup is going to be, this stable of wide receivers against Penn State secondary. And I know Colin, doesn't love some of the guys in the Penn State secondary as much as some other guys do. But, Joey Porter Jr., Johnny Dixon, Kalen King, all top 10 in PBUs in the country. And then Penn State is top 5 in the country in pass defense efficiency. And Ohio State is number 1 in passing efficiency. I think this game is won and lost in that department. If Penn State can say, hey, you know what, we're going to put 4 guys on islands, and we're going to have the opportunity to bring 5 to 7 guys and try to get CJ Stroud off schedule. I think that there's a chance that Penn State can really, wreak some havoc in this game. And it's such a stylistically different game than what it is going to be what it was against Michigan. Right now, I'd be interested to see if Ohio State tries to assert themselves in the run game early, and I'd be interested to think if Colin thinks that's part of might be part of the game plan, because if there is any defense, any secondary that can match up with this passing attack from Ohio State, if there's anybody, somehow, some way, it's going to be Penn State's for the first time in a while. And so I just think it's an interesting stylistic matchup. But I'm interested to hear if Colin thinks, maybe they'll try to assert the run game, because Ohio State is a very balanced football team.
Well, with the exception of maybe last year, I think that when Ohio State plays their best football, and people have this misconception because Ohio State has all these great, phenomenal one receivers, that they're just a have to throw the ball team. With the exception of last year, all of Ohio State 2019, 2020, and even this year going on right now, when they run the football the best, that's when they're at their best. So if you're asking, I think Ohio State right now is a power run football team that just has ridiculous weapons on the outside of receiver. So when you say, do I think they're going to establish it early? I think they're going to establish it early in every game they play, make people come up and get in the box, make them stop the run, and then get one-on-ones on the outside with their receivers. But there are great matchups. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. versus Marvin Harrison is interesting on a bunch of different levels. Their dads didn't really like each other in the NFL either. So, I mean, that's a pretty interesting one to watch. But, yeah, I think Ohio State's going to make them – Ohio State is a two-headed monster running back right now. I mean, everyone talks about Trayvon Henderson. The fact of the matter is Mayan Williams has been better than him pretty much every game this year they've played, with the exception of the one against the scrub team. Trayvon went off. But, I mean, they're going to make Penn State come up and stop the run. And it doesn't help what Penn State showed on film of not being willing to get in there and make that the number 1 priority against Michigan.
Do you think we see Joey Porter Jr. Follow Marvin Harrison around wherever he goes?
No, because I think if it was like just Marvin Harrison and then everyone else, then maybe. Like, all right, we're just going to throw him on there and watch him. But it's like you want Joey Porter Jr. to guard Ekbuka sometimes too. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't think it's going to be follow Marvin Harrison. He'll be lined up on him a good bit though. I think he'll get his spell with Marvin this weekend.
Yeah, just the biggest.
Colin's out on Joey Porter Jr.
already.
Oh, I'm not necessarily out on him. Again, you're going to find out how good they are this weekend. And look, they could come in and play a great game against Ohio State. And I mean, that very well could happen. I mean, a lot of people like Joey Porter Jr., but I think that there's been some games where when I hear people talk about him being like a number 1 corner, like he's going to be one of the best corners in the country. Number 1 corners in the country don't give up. They just don't give up completions. I mean, Stingley last year, Okuda when he was at Ohio State. I just think Porter gives up a lot of receptions. I'm not saying they're huge gains, but I just think he gives up some catches. I mean, the Purdue game is a perfect example of that. He gave up like 6 slant routes.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a crazy bounce back year. Last year, he was a complete liability in coverage and just a penalty attractor. But this year, he's played great. But with that being said, Ohio State 14.5-point favorite right now, over under at 16.5. Let's transition into our prediction part of the show here. I'll go to you, Garrett, first. We went into the Michigan game. You expected a double-digit win over the Wolverines.
Yeah.
In fact, it went the other way. This week.
Did it go the other way?
I don't know. I'm not sure. We burnt the film, buried the tape, and moved on. But where do you see right now in terms of which side do you see this going in terms of the spread? And basically, do you see Penn State keeping this game close in your score prediction?
Yeah. I think I keep waiting for Ohio State to – I'm torn because I don't think Penn State does not win the football game. I do not have Penn State winning the football game. I'm battling, as to where Penn State will fall when it comes to the spread. And I think Ohio State is the best team in the country when they're playing their best. People are trying to say Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee. None of those three teams are as complete as Ohio State is. But I just haven't seen, I watched games like against Iowa last week, and I just see some things that are just like, that kind of surprises me. And part of it can be like, you're trying to get 18 to 22-year-olds to get up every week. I think that they will be up for this game. This is basically, the last gate before they just have all eyes on the game, on Thanksgiving weekend against Michigan. So I think Penn State, plays the typical game that they always play against Ohio State. I think it will be a little muddier. I think it'll be, kind of close early. Wouldn't be surprised if Penn State gets off to a slow start. That has been something that they've, have done against Ohio State. It hasn't been like, well, they get out, other than 2017 and 2018, they get out to a big lead. And then, it's like, you're just waiting for Ohio State to come back. Ohio State has started off well in these games, and then Penn State finds a way to muddy it up. If they can defend the run and they're not getting gashed every single play, I think it will be a competitive football game. And I think Penn State will cover. I think it's going to be something like, 34-21 or 30-17, something like that. And so, but again, this is Penn State's season right here, right? You want this to be the year. Sean Clifford, you want to be the guy that people remember forever, not for just being, Penn State's grandpa quarterback. You want to be remembered for something else, do it. Do it this week. This is the week to do it. And so I don't think he'll do it, but, there's, this is why we're not going. This is why they roll the balls out and they play, right? So I think I got Ohio State 31-17, somewhere in there.
Of the week.
What's up?
You're talking about the Big Ten Player of the Week and Sean Clifford.
Mikey, you're sounding like Coach. You're sounding like Jimmy right now.
I was trying to do. That's better than anything CJ Stroud's ever done. Big Ten Player of the Week.
Yeah. I think it's gonna be. I will say one thing. I've said this from the summer when we started talking about this. I am going to be, just from being like a football nut and loving to watch this. And I know Colin, and I know you guys do too. I really can't wait to see the matchup between Ohio State's receivers and Penn State's secondary. Everybody talks about how good Penn State's secondary is, and they're always doing this thing, this like freaking no-fly zone stuff. Well, let's see if they can do it this week against four guys that actually are going to play on Sundays, right? So that's my take on it. Interested to hear what you guys have.
All right, we'll go to Colin here. Colin, I know you already said you got Penn State winning this in a close game, but you can just tell everyone why you think that.
No, I would say I would go Ohio State 38, Penn State 17. I'll say Ohio State gets 30. I just think Penn State's going to give Ohio State too many short fields, and I don't think Penn State's going to be able to. I think they'll may stop the run a little bit early. But I think eventually Ohio State's just going to wear them down. And the offensive line didn't play well last week, which, part of that's Iowa has a great front seven, but I think the offensive line's going to come out and play pretty well and establish the run early, and I think that's going to make it pretty tough on Penn State.
Yeah, I'm with both of you here in terms of that final score prediction. I would guess 42-28 right now. I think around there. That feels right.
Wow.
I think.
You think Penn State's going to score points then?
Yeah, I do. I think there's going to be a weird special teams or defensive touchdown early that will energize Penn State. We're keeping it close, but I just think the talent disparity is just too much for this Penn State team to keep up with. And I'm still kind of bitter. I hate when guys get out of PA and go somewhere like Julian Fleming, like an hour away. Like I hate that he's not a Nittany Lion because he could help this team out so much. Like Penn State's receiving.
Marvin Harrison Jr.'s from Philadelphia. Kyle McCord, their backup quarterback from Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's just like these guys make you a college football perennial. Like Penn State doesn't have any dudes out there. Like Mitchell Tinsley's a great addition, but he's a possession receiver who's just kind of an old head there. Parker Washington's kind of been in the shadow. I mean, he was obviously benefited off of Jahan Dotson's attention last year, kind of opened him up. But yeah, I like a 42-28 game. If Penn State starts slow, it could get ugly fast. I don't think they have the dudes to really keep up to make it up. But to even be competitive in this, keep the season alive, they're going to need the best game ever out of Sean Clifford. And like Garrett said, like now's the time. Like you can do that against Minnesota. Like go out and play. Go beat a great team. But it's going to come down to the wide receiver cornerback matchup. But guys, thank you obviously so much for joining the show, and we'll reconnect here after the game and talk about Penn State's upset win. So
yeah. Hey Mike, can I say one thing before we get off?
Yeah,
one thing. I know you're trying to close this out, but I have a political message. Okay, it's political season. I think we lost Colin, but that's fine. What Fox Sports is doing is a travesty, and it's a crime against college football. Okay, and I just want to make another point for college football in general and these TV people. Okay, Georgia, defending national champion, they are not going to play a night game for the first time as a defending national champion for the first time since they invented lights. Okay, that you can play night games. First time ever. The pendulum has swung to these noon early kicks, and it's wrong. Okay, it's just wrong. You know, you need Penn State.
You guys play one noon
Penn
kick
State,
against a good team in the world.
Yeah, no, and it does because I think there might be there could be, and listen, I'll allocate some of my time to you here in a second, Colin, but there could be a little bit of a conspiracy where, you know, Penn State obviously needs that environment to beat teams like Ohio State. And I do think Fox likes Ohio State more, and they like Michigan as well, and they're more talented. And so I think there's a little bit of, we want to take the environment out of it to make sure Penn State does not have a chance. And yes, am I on a limb here? But I think there are other Penn Staters in the Penn State podcast that would agree with me on this, and they're not happy with what's going on. And so I want to put my foot down. I want to make sure I'm clear that this is a travesty. It's a crime. Okay. Look at that environment last week against a mediocre Big Ten West team. It was incredible. It was incredible.
Mikey,
you better not cut this out either. This is the best part of the podcast. You better not cut this out.
I'm not. They could play this game at Memorial Field with State High's band there, and Ohio State like 3 touchdowns. I don't care.
No.
Mikey, when did you have Alex?
You and I were there in 2016, and if that game's played at noon, Ohio State wins 38-7, and you know that. And you know it.
Mikey,
Colin knows it too.
When did Alex Jones join the podcast?
I don't think the time.
I mean, are you kidding me?
I think that.
I think it's a 7. I think it's a.
We played Michigan at noon every year. We play Wisconsin at noon every year. We had to play you guys at noon in 2019. And Ohio State last year was the first night game. So
listen.
Does that mean A&M should have to play Bama at night?
No, Colin. Ohio State can win at any time, at any place, any stadium, any planet. Penn State can only beat you guys in a certain environment, one place.
Okay, well then I would argue
it's a testament to you. And Fox is making sure it doesn't happen. It's
Garrett, if you only made Ohio State play Penn State an 8:00 game, then there'd be a conspiracy against Ohio State because that's the only way Penn State could possibly win. So take your conspiracy.
Why would Fox take potentially their biggest ad revenue week of the year? There are no good other night games this week. Why? Because of branding. Okay,
Garrett,
it's branding and it's a conspiracy. They're on Ohio State's bandwagon.
Garrett,
and they're on Michigan's bandwagon.
Mikey,
you agree with me?
The biggest college football game every single season for the last 100 years played at noon.
Every single game, every single year, and with the exception of one.
The biggest college football game every single season is played at noon, and it's the last Saturday in November. So it is not that big a deal. Ohio State has had to play Wisconsin at noon, all these teams at noon. It happens.
Thank you. I want to reclaim my time.
There you go.
Oh, I muted myself. No, you muted me.
I muted you, but I just can't unmute you. I can just stop you.
the last time in the last 25 years, the most viewed game on television was Ohio State, Michigan, and it started at 3:30.
Yeah, in 2006, the only game. No, it was 2006. It was the only game. It was the only game in the history of the rivalry being a 1 versus 2 o'clock game. But if you also look on there, the 2 versus 3 game in 2016 is also one of the top, probably 5 or 6 games of the last 25 years, and it was a noon game. I mean, it's.
There's a reason why they call it prime time, Colin. There's a reason why they call it prime time.
Look, you're mad because Penn State lost their one advantage they've ever had.
Yes, that is 100%. I'm not I've made that completely clear. That is the only advantage that we have, and the only way we win the game.
Well, we're gonna find out who wins it, but try this again, guys. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate.